Hey guys, Zane here with another One Take review, and today I wanted to talk about Radiohead's Amnesiac. Amnesiac is a bit of an odd spot in the Radiohead discography, as it isn't a super beloved album by critics, not to say that it's hated or anything, it's just not as well loved as an album like OK Computer or even The Bends, but at the same time, it isn't totally forgotten in the way that the band's debut, Pablo Honey, is, which means that Amnesiac is kind of the Radiohead fans' album. I say that Amnesiac is the Radiohead fans' album because this just isn't their most accessible, one of their least accessible, actually, as, of course, Radiohead aren't the most sonically direct, mainstream kind of sounding band, but at the same time, Amnesiac has such a cold ambience about it that it kind of feels like a little more difficult to get into than the vast majority of the band's other releases. Songs like Dollars and Cents sound kind of paranoid and anxious, meanwhile other tracks like the fan favorite Pyramid song feel very manic in its lyricism and almost feel journal written-esque by a manic depressive. They're just written in a very cold and distant and very disheartening kind of way that you could only really enjoy if you knew what you were expecting beforehand. A number of bands would easily belly flop in this creative direction, as cryptic melancholy can come across very easily as incredibly pretentious, and while Radiohead do push it from time to time here or there, as they always do, they generally manage to achieve this sound quite well, if not with a bit of a lack of power behind it in the way that records like OK Computer would have. Radiohead's previous album, Kid A, obviously heavily experimented with electronic sounds, that's that record's claim to fame, and why it's considered such a massive moment within not only Radiohead's discography, but the general world of alternative music, and while Amnesiac is nowhere near as experimental as Kid A was for the time period, that electronic influence definitely does carry over to some extent. Many songs here take on very subtle but pleasant electronic influences that make for a very easy-going listening experience beyond the general feel of, again, distance between the band and the listener. However, there are times on Amnesiac where Radiohead truly do completely embrace that through-and-through electronic sound that they more heavily developed, again, on the previous album, Kid A. And again, it just makes Amnesiac slightly harder to get into if you're not familiar with Radiohead, but if you are familiar with Radiohead, then you might enjoy this. While Kid A did arguably utilize those electronic influences significantly better than Amnesiac does, the latter's own unique way of handling those influences in a more nuanced manner definitely make it stand out within the Radiohead discography and even stand out from its much more famous and arguably superior predecessor. The actual instrumentation on Amnesiac is pretty solid as well. Going beyond the previously mentioned electronic instrumentation, the majority of the interesting moments musically, or at least in my personal opinion as far as actual compositions go, are found on the last half of the record. The guitar work from Johnny Greenwood and Ed O'Brien on the totally instrumental Hunting Bears is quite good, and Philip Selway's drumming throughout the record is generally fantastic, as he does remain one of, in my personal view, the most underrated drummers of alternative rock music. The usage of synths and keyboards and other atmospheric electronic instruments on songs like Spinning Plates definitely add a sort of ambience to the record that it definitely needs to succeed in the way that it tries to at times, in that very cold and heartless manner, and it ends up working out for the better 9 times out of 10. I also happen to absolutely adore the jazz rock influenced composition on the album closing Life in a Glass House. It's my favorite song on the album. It's a fantastic closer, even if it does feel a bit abrupt to some extent, and I really do think that jazz is a genre of music that I wish Radiohead explored more often. I mean, sure, one could argue that every album since maybe Kid A has had some form of jazz influence to it, but I'd really love to hear Radiohead just do a full-on jazz rock album. Obviously, Radiohead aren't totally known as individuals for their instrumental work, but they are more known as a collective that often come together to make fantastic work, and that's exactly what they do on Amnesiac, as each individual member of the group manages to really work with each other with a sort of chemistry that allows to create a very powerful and gripping atmosphere. So, overall, Amnesiac is an album that simultaneously gets due credit and doesn't get enough credit. I do feel that it is rightfully appreciated by the Radiohead fanbase, like most of the band's discography excluding Pablo Honey, even if it doesn't reach the heights of the previous and following couple of albums. However, I do wish more critics and publications would maybe reevaluate or at least retrospectively look at Amnesiac, as I do think that they would see a record that not only stands out within Radiohead's discography, but stands out in 2000s alternative music as well. And even though I don't think that this is the Radiohead's best album or anything like that, I still do think that Amnesiac really is a spotlight kind of record that deserves more attention. So I'm going to give Amnesiac 4 stars out of 5. It's definitely a moving and very cold and depressing but emotionally powerful record that will not click with everybody on the first listen, and it probably won't click at all no matter how many listens you do with a good number of people, and understandably so. But Amnesiac, again, still may be the most emotionally charged, indirectly or directly emotionally charged Radiohead album that they had done up to this point. So again, 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.